Hey guys, welcome back to Steel City Roundtable. This is Thanksgiving week, post Thanksgiving. I am your host, Mark Kneebone, and then of course my lovely co-host is dun dun dun. Now it's Snyder.
Hello again, everybody. Nice to be here. We all
How?
survived Thanksgiving.
Yes. So Thanksgiving was good, right? Right? How was yours?
It was nice. It
Yeah.
was nice to just kind of take a breather.
Yeah, breather.
I actually didn't work on Thanksgiving.
Oh, really?
I did not
Were the
return.
courts closed?
The courts were actually closed and closed yesterday.
Oh, that's good.
But like I didn't return emails. I didn't other than very nice clients sending me happy Thanksgiving messages. That's
Yes, I
all I
mean,
responded to.
you were good at texting me like, "Hey, you gonna put that up sometime this week?" And I'm like, "Eh."
I just worry it's user error because
It is user error. Like if you haven't
like if
noticed
I
it,
don't see it, but I'm only seeing it on YouTube. So I was like, did I miss it?
yeah, if you haven't noticed, I'm very all over the place 90% of the time. And like one minute I'll be like, let's put it out today. And then the next minute I'm like, oh, it's Thanksgiving. Let's put this one out this week and that one out next week. So it's like, yeah, work in progress, folks. I'm kind of an idiot. But yeah, so good Thanksgiving. Got to spend time with the family and the kids.
I
And you
did.
got to unwind a little bit.
I did.
Mine was not as good.
Okay.
It was great because I spent it with my girlfriend Shelly. We cooked a Thanksgiving dinner and then we went to my buddy's house and hung out, and it was really nice. But the holidays take a lot out of me, you know. And I want to say it's just the addiction and the mental health, but they just, not a lot of great memories there. So they take a lot out of me. But we're going to talk about that on another episode.
I definitely think we should. Holidays are tough. Holidays are tough, I think, for everybody.
Yeah.
I know for me, just from I love the time with my family. I love the slow down with court, but at the same time, it's also a slow down with money coming in,
Yeah.
because people are spending it on their families, but that has a reverse effect, also on
And
us.
you got to
So
slow
it's,
your brain down too. You know what I mean? Like you got to
no,
take a step
what?
back. You got to calm the inner demons.
The demons can calm down, but the brain, I mean, if I could get it to slow, that'd be great, but it doesn't really happen. Holidays are not.
Well, that's why I love having you on here, is because you always are going 100 miles a minute and you're always thinking, which is awesome. So we're going to start this off today. So I actually did read the comments this week, and we actually had a lot of them, which was pretty cool. So I did want to address a couple things that were mentioned in these comments, maybe a better description, definition, practical usage. One of the people in the chat was saying about qualified immunity, how qualified immunity allows cops to break the law and be protected. Now, first, the definition of qualified immunity is that government agents are not held liable civilly, provided that they do not violate a clearly established constitutional right. What
Right.
does that mean? To you, what does that mean? You're a lawyer.
Forget what it means to me as a lawyer. What it means to me from a common sense perspective is if you do something wrong, you're not going to be covered. If you don't do anything wrong, you may be covered.
Correct. So qualified immunity is basically, it's the element that just because you're accused does not mean you're guilty, correct? That's
Correct.
until proven guilty. So when an officer gets brought up on a complaint or there's a civil lawsuit, if in the investigation that officer is deemed to have violated a clearly established constitutional right, such as the right to to fair trial, all that bullshit. Search and seizure is a big thing, right? An illegal search. If it's deemed that that officer violated that person's constitutional rights, which in this case would be a civil right, still a constitutional right, that officer cannot be qualified for immunity. Keyword is qualified. A lot of people think that qualified immunity means that just, oh, a cop never gets held accountable for anything, and that's complete bullshit. If you violate someone's civil rights, like if you abuse of force, if you search illegally without consent, without probable cause, without a search warrant, and you violate that person's rights, the cop will be held accountable and they can be held civilly. But if they do not do that, so say example, an officer is accused of violating someone's civil rights, and during the investigation is determined that he or she did not violate a constitutional right, then they are qualified for immunity. So anybody who wants to use the argument that qualified immunity allows an officer to violate someone's rights and they are not held accountable, you are wrong. You should probably do your research before you say something stupid. So try again.
And the one
Next.
thing I will add, just my final piece of that is There's been a lot of negative things happening to and about officers in the recent years. But the one thing that has occurred is I think there's been a substantial increase in officers being held accountable for when they violate someone's rights. I think there's been, unfortunately, for a lot of wrong reasons, it's gone full bore the other way, which unfortunately means a lot of good apples get scooped up in the bunch.
I agree. I agree.
But but there's less rampant, we can do whatever we want.
They are spending more time trying to find officers accountable than they did in the past.
Yes.
100%. You know, when someone's accused, when an officer's accused of something, it's now just not like, oh, well, it's not a big deal. We're good. They're not going to do anything with it. Now it's like you're going to be held accountable on the carpet. They're going to get, their supervisors are going to hit you first. If they're doing their jobs, they're going to hit you first with, what did you do here? This does not make sense. Please explain it. And if a supervisor is doing their job correctly, they will then instigate the investigation further into the civil rights abuse. But, you know, you're right. Social media, cameras, all those things have tainted the light that officers are looked at in. But it's also, I think, like you said, it's promoted more officer accountability. So, you know, do I like the videos when they're a 30-second snippet that doesn't show the beginning, doesn't show the end? No. But it has served its purpose. It has drawn the attention to the officers that are doing things the wrong way.
And it
So I
needed
think
to
that's the
happen.
good aspect.
Yeah.
So that ties into another thing. Civilian review boards. Another person brought up civilian review boards. So if I am not a fan of civilian review boards, because 9 times out of 10 they're not for the police. They basically review cases that someone files a complaint with the civilian review board, thinking that they're attached to law enforcement, which they are not. Most of them do not have any legal standing. They cannot file charges. All they can do is make a judgment or a opinion of whether or not they feel an officer did something wrong or did not do something wrong, and then they can forward that to the department, and then the department can review that and decide whether they want to do something with it. But they don't make policy. And like I said, 9 times out of 10, it's you guys. Civilian review boards are you guys. It's everyday people that feel that they have a inherent responsibility to stop law enforcement officers from abusing power and making bad decisions and doing bad things. But once again, if you use the argument that a civilian review board is going to get officers off and they're not going to be prosecuted, there's the line between law enforcement and carrying out justice against officers if they need it, and civilian review boards, which do not really have any power. So, I mean, I don't know what your opinion is on that, but that's my take on them from what I've seen, because the city of Pittsburgh has one. And, you know, most of the time they're not even taken seriously.
I think that the platform, the idea of checks and balances generally in life is a good thing.
100%.
Generally in the CJ system is a good thing. First of all, if anybody thinks that a civilian review board, at least in this area, is quote unquote on the side of cops, that is not. That is the farthest thing from the truth in the world. The difficulty I have is my naive self, once again, with the system and anybody that's part of it. First of all, I think that the people that are on the review board should have some general knowledge of the legal system from how it works, top to bottom, beginning to end. Number one, to have some context for what they're Monday morning quarterbacking. But I also think that they should be unbiased people. I feel the same way about magistrates and judges, and I have, there's not a whole lot of those. There are some. But I think that anybody who is in the position of sitting in judgment of another human being in whatever aspect, then you should be completely unbiased in doing that. Otherwise,
That's
you
a really
should
good
not
point.
be sitting in judgment.
That's a really good point, because a lot of times they are biased. A lot of times, they may come from an urban environment where there's a lot more seen of the police. The police are there more often, so there's a different attitude. And that brings me on to my third point from the comments. The mentality that all cops are evil and all cops are liars and all cops are tyrannical and this and this and that, that is so incredibly full of ignorance and lack of knowledge into the situation. It's like any other profession. There are good and there are bad. There are horrible and there are excellent. One person said that, then why don't we see, why is it always we see them doing something wrong on TV? I said, well, are you really going to go out of your way to say the cop did his job? Is anybody going to go out of their way to say the cop did his job?
Well, no, and I think it goes back to something that we've touched on any number of times is negativity always wins. We'll
It's so much
always
easier.
get more
So much
attention.
easier.
It's easier. It's more it's more entertaining for lack of a better word. You know,
Yeah, you don't get the clicks if you say, well, so and so did his job right and nothing happened.
right, because it's not dramatic.
Yeah,
It doesn't feed into that human need for drama.
It doesn't build stats. It doesn't improve their viewership. You know what I mean?
Correct. And I think that it's, I sit here as a defense attorney and I have dealt with far more good, beyond good, and excellent officers than I've dealt with piss poor ones.
I mean, everybody knows here that I'm pro law enforcement. Every time I talk about law enforcement, I say how I'm pro law enforcement. I am pro law enforcement as long as you follow an ethical and moral code and you do things the way you're supposed to and you don't violate people's rights. End of story. If you violate people's rights, you're a shitbag and you deserve to get in trouble. That's my opinion.
And I agree with it. I mean, I'm married to a cop,
Yes.
and I have some very dear friends that are cops that are, average, above average. Some of my friends are in the excellent category. But I also feel, like you said, it's any profession. There are crappy lawyers too. There's a reason lawyer jokes exist. And it's because people do dumb things. Sometimes they're intentionally dumb. Sometimes they're just wicked and evil.
Yeah, it comes back to the different types of officers we've talked about.
Right. And it's the same, there's sober lawyers, there's drunk lawyers, there's, insecure lawyers, there's imposter syndrome lawyers, there's arrogant lawyers, the same as there with anywhere, because it comes down to the simple principle that all of these fields are populated with human beings.
The human condition. I mean, I was lucky. I was very fortunate in that I worked with some really sharp people. Like
Yeah, you did.
I've surrounded myself with people that I trusted. So when I was doing traffic enforcement or if I was going out being proactive and trying to do something, I was pairing myself up with other officers that I knew that had a similar mentality. They did things a certain way. They did some, I'm OCD like a mofo. So like they did things that I approved of. Not that I'm their supervisor, but like if I went to battle with those folks that I worked with, I knew that we were good because they didn't do stuff willy-nilly. They didn't just jump off the handle and smack people. They followed the use of force continuum. They did things the right way. So I didn't see the really, bad behavior in the people say dirty cops, but the cops that make bad decisions and do bad things. The other thing is that in a department, the people that do things fucked up are known throughout the department to do things fucked up. So people don't want to work with them. Like they end up doing a lot of stuff by themselves because people don't want to deal with their bullshit. Now, granted, is that the way to handle it? Probably not. But if an officer isn't there to see it, they're not going to be held accountable. So the peripheral officer, the one that usually will get charged with collateral misconduct, if they're not on that call, they're not going to see it.
Right.
So it's avoidance, and that's not a good thing either, like to avoid helping
Not the
other
best
cops and
attachment
stuff like
style.
that. It's not tactical, it's not safe. But, that's the problem now is, officers have to look out for themselves now. Before it was they had to look out for each other. Now it's a dog eat world, step over your warm body to get what I want type of thing. So,
Welcome to lawyer land.
yeah, so with that being said, you have any more comments on that little nuggets of information?
Only just that, again, we focus a lot on law enforcement, but it happens everywhere. But it also very much exists with the lawyers. There are certain lawyers where you're happy to have co-defendants with, or you would refer a representation of a victim on your case to, not for any shady reason, not that we're telling anybody not to do anything, but again, it's a matter of feeling safe and working with people that you trust, that have a similar mindset. And I think that that's true for all of us, but especially true for those of us in the CJ system, because we're the only people that get what we see and can understand it. So that matter of feeling professionally, emotionally, physically safe and stable and with like-minded people is even more important to us, I think, or more monumental to us than, somebody who doesn't. play
like
in
it.
this playground
I
every
like it.
day.
Guys, I don't know what you're thinking, but I'm thinking this chick's pretty badass, and I got to keep her on this show. I think she's amazing and has a lot of insight, and I'm glad that she's able to join us. Please leave a comment. Tell me if you like what Natalie has to say, because she's not going to care either way. But
I do care.
all right, so let's get to what you said. There was something on your mind today, and we really didn't get to talk about it. So why don't you tell me what you're thinking?
So we touched on a little bit in one of our episodes, but something that's a daily struggle for me is, and I know you don't have kids, but you worked with tons of people that do, is parenting and raising kids is a part of the CJ system. And it's stuff that you don't necessarily think about. Like my kids have been coming into court since they were wee. You know, they've come with me when they didn't have school and there was no other options. You know they're surrounded by, well, other than their dad, they're surrounded by cops and lawyers and prosecutors and defense attorneys. And so it's something that is ingrained in them. And then sometimes I take a step back and it's like, is it good that it's ingrained in them or is it bad? Is it going to negatively affect how they relate? Because I think about things like my kids are so comfortable overall with police officers that, are they going to get pulled over? I've got a child 3 weeks from today turning 16, so I'm thinking about driving constantly. Are they going to get pulled over when the officer approaches? And because, their Uncle Q's a police officer, they're going to be like, what's up, bruh?
The first thing they're going to say is, my mom is, or my dad is. Probably what's going to happen. If they're smart, that's what they're going to say. Because then somebody's going to be like, oh, really? Okay.
Probably better to lead off with what dad is than what mom is.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things, so the thesis then for today, the idea is the difficulties of raising children while in the CJ system.
Yeah, because I think there's things that I'm paranoid about. When we were kids, you slept over at friends' houses all the time. You know, and it was normal and it was fine and there were no issues. And now it's like, I'm scared to death to have my kids sleep over at someone's house because you can't unring the bell. What if something happens? What if, and I love my kids' friends, families. That was a whole lot of plurals there, and they're all people I know and I trust. But there's something that, a paranoia that lives in us that's like, what if something happened? What if somebody touched my kid? Like maybe not even to a terrible, awful, full throttle degree, but you can't unring that bell. And I don't think my parents, maybe I'm wrong, I never asked them, but I don't think my parents not seeing this every day, because we see kids that have had this happen. We see, the adults that they become and
We see a
the
lot
issues.
of kids. We see a lot of kids that are kids of cops turn out to be the complete opposite. They turn
Right.
out to be criminals. They turn out to be people with major mental health issues and make
Right.
really bad decisions.
And how does it, and we see, sometimes a lot of
I'm
lawyers.
not trying to scare you or anything.
No, you couldn't scare me any more than I already am, but you wonder about these things, and it's like, you don't know how to prevent it. You can't, there's nothing else I want to do. There's nothing else I would do as well as what I do. But, I just wonder, like, how do you navigate that?
So let's back this up to the beginning. Were you a lawyer when you had your first child?
Yes.
Okay, so you're how old at the time? Approximately, when you had your first kid?
33.
Okay, so 33. That's when I became a cop. So not a kid, not a full blown adult yet. Kind of still skating that line of wanting to have fun, but got to do what I got to do to pay the bills. What was the thought process? What was the discussions? And I don't want specifics, of course, but with your husband at the time, or what was the, like, how did you guys deal with that? Like, was it planned, number one? And then based off of that, if it wasn't planned, how did you handle it? And if it was planned, how did you handle it?
It was planned. I have wanted to have kids forever, so it was a known variable. It was planned. Both our kids were planned. But I don't know that we ever talked about, because that was in the time frame when I was sitting in a fishbowl. So I'd left the DA's office before I got pregnant, and hadn't started my practice yet. So I was somewhat on the tail end. So I know that I don't think we talked about it a whole lot, even though at that point my husband was still on the job, and I think it was just a given. You know, you're not going to sit down and be like, wow, it's really scary. I really want to have kids, but I don't want to have to explain to them that their dad got shot and killed while he was at work. I don't think we really talked about it in that sense. We just kind of dove in and it was just, well, it is what it is. And, I didn't think at that point, I didn't know I'd be returning to the criminal system. And, it just was kind of how we lived. We didn't talk about what we thought the effects were, because usually these are things that just swim around in my own head that I, overthink to the nth degree. And I don't think a lot of us do, because so many of us have kids. We talk about our kids, but I don't think any of us have ever sat down and been like, do you think you parent differently because you're a part of the CJ system? I don't think that's a conversation that's ever happened, even for as much as I talk.
Well,
I
I mean,
don't
it's
think I've
not even
ever
a
asked.
conversation that would make any sense because you wouldn't know. You've only been a parent as someone in the CJ system. You don't know what it's like to be the parent of, being a mall guard or, a bus driver or truck driver or a teacher. Like you wouldn't have anything to speak on of that. So it's kind of a mute point. What I'm guessing is that, you guys basically just had to field it on the fly. When questions would arise between the two of you or when concerns would arise between the two of you, you just had to deal with it as it came.
Yeah, and I think there was that given understanding between the two of us that we share the same worries and quote unquote paranoias that are just because of what we do. And that was just kind of a given that we were going to maybe do things differently than other parents, just because it's so important that you can't unring the bell. So I think it was deal with it on the fly, but also just,
Really unspoken.
yeah,
Just kind of like accepted.
yes.
Which is crazy for me. Like you said, like you pointed out so eloquently, I don't have children. Thank you very much. But I've worked with a lot of people that have kids. Like one of my last partners, when I was in narcotics, had I believe 3 kids. And even to this day, when I talk to him on the phone, it's like, yeah, man, I can't talk. I'm running around with the kids right now. Hey, man, I can't talk. I got to take the kids here. I got to take the kids there. Like it's literally having 2 full-time jobs in my eyes. Because not only are you doing a 40, 50, 60-hour week as an attorney or as a cop or as a fireman or as a paramedic, whatever, you're coming home and then you got to change those shoes, put on the parent shoes, and now you got to take care of kids. Like, how do you deal with that amount of pressure? Like, to me, that's a lot of pressure. Like, that's probably why I haven't had kids, is because I have enough problems taking care of myself, let alone being able to come home and, like I want to take a nap when I come home from work. Oh, I can't take a nap. I got to take Joey to practice, and then I got to take Josephina here, and then I got to take what's his name in the back somewhere else. You know what I mean? Like, that's a lot of responsibility to take on top of a full-time job. How do you do it?
I always kind of chuckle when people ask that question. Is there another option? It just needs done.
Well, I mean,
In,
when you think in retrospect, like things that you've had to change or accommodate.
because I look at and I make this comment going out the door in the morning. Okay, day one is over of this day. It's like having 4 days shoved into one. I think that what it comes from is whatever that switch is that gets flipped. At least I can only speak from a mom perspective, but it's a heck of a big switch. And as soon as you have kids, your focus is completely different, and they're all that matters. So everything else kind of works around them. Thus, my decision to start my practice so that I could have the flexibility to not be stuck in a fishbowl for 9 hours a day, not be able to be there for, events for them. So I think that it's just a shift in focus in the sense that for me, what I do was necessary, from a work perspective, from a professional perspective, was necessary for me to fulfill the who I am part and who I am as a mom. And that is the most important thing. And I think I would venture to say any parent, but again, I'm not a dad, so I can't speak to that. But for me, it's like, it's also the best part of my day is when work is, I don't want to say over because I don't get that luxury anymore, but when work is on the side burner and I'm primarily mom. And there is something great about being able to, now that, especially now that my office is in my home, to be in my office doing work and have my kids either in their rooms or, at the dining room table doing their homework and their schoolwork. and we all can still be physically present with one another. I don't have to necessarily be somewhere else. And so that part makes it a lot easier. But I think that it's, I drive. My kids will tell you I'm essentially just they say a Lyft or an Uber driver. For us, I'm a jitney. I drive all day long, back and forth to court, round the circuit, and then I drive kids places. But it's the biggest relief. And one of the things I like is that my kids do know what I do. So to the extent, and clearly I'm limited with what I can talk about, they hear about the day to day. So, from my perspective, I have the blessing of being able to raise two daughters who get to see, not from a pat on my back perspective, but you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. You don't have to just fit into one thing. If you decide you want to get married, be a stay-at-home mom, great. That's fantastic. That doesn't mean you shouldn't go to college. That doesn't mean you shouldn't get a graduate degree, because you're not going to have kids forever. But if you want to work outside the home, great, that's awesome. I can only show you an example of what that's like. So at the very least, I say, from watching my dad go back in his office at 2:30 in the morning after we were asleep and get work done, that I knew what it was like, what I was getting into being self-employed. And as much as I think my kids see and hear about things that I wish they didn't, from the sense of, yeah, I had a client flip out at me, or XYZ happened, they don't love that either, because my kids are very, very protective of me. So they get kind of angry when these things happen. But they also get to see that as girls growing up, you can do it all. You're not, the only thing limiting you is you. And yeah, a nap would be great. And sometimes I do just collapse and I'm out cold on the couch and everybody's like, oh, we lost mom. But it gets done because it has to, because ultimately they're not going to be there forever. They're going to grow up and have lives of their own.
Yeah.
And I'm going to have more than enough time, and more time than I ever wanted, to nap.
Well, let's go back to something you said that I thought was pretty important. You said that, with you having your business out of your home now, you get to be around your kids and, be around your family more because of that. So your situation is not strange, cop married to lawyer, because there's a lot of people in law enforcement and in the legal system that marry first responders. They either marry firemen or paramedics or cops. So you're all kind of like.
And cops and nurses.
And cops and nurses, that's a big one. That's a big one. That's very, very common. So, with cops, I know, just from speaking from my point of view, sometimes it's very hard to leave work behind. So, like when you have a bad case and, something that's really kind of like on your mind, and, you get one of those cases that's like a once in a lifetime, you wish you could give a bad case. How do you separate that part of your life from the parental part of your life? Because, another reason why I probably didn't have kids is because I didn't deal with my own shit. So how the hell was I going to have kids if I couldn't get past my own garbage? You know what I mean? Like, it was very hard for me to unload my shit. How do you do that? How do you deal with that as a parent, coming home and, having this really bad thing on your mind and then flipping that big mom switch?
Well, that is an answer that has progressed and changed for me over the last number of months. Historically, the answer to that is just shove it down, put it in the back, let your mind tear itself up about it, let it internally eat at you. Don't talk to anyone. Don't share what's going on with anyone. Don't unload on anyone, because you don't want to do it to your kids. You don't want to do it in your house. You don't want them hearing these things. So for the vast majority of my parenting time, that's what I did, and just, created a really anxiety-riddled mess of a person.
That really sounds like an addict brain. That really sounds like what addicts and alcoholics do.
I don't think there's that much separation other than a substance itself. Mentally, I don't think there's that much of a separation.
I agree 100%. I mean, everything you described, like, isolation, putting things away, not dealing with them, just festering over them, letting them sit there and, live rent-free in the back of your head, affecting your life, because now you've got this shit you're trying not to deal with, so it actually weighs on you and causes more problems, right?
And it's an endless cycle to say,
Yeah.
it's absolutely the same as an addict. And so, when I spun in that little hamster wheel for many, many years until the pot was boiling over and you realized, okay, there has to be an outlet. So I started, for me personally, I started, having those few core people around me that I could vent to, that were friends, that understood.
Like your support network.
Yes, that
Okay.
I had never, that I hadn't been, yeah, that I hadn't been open with. And the first thing that I did was realizing that, okay, there was too much going on in my head, and, decided to take the first step for me, which was to start therapy. Something I had never been the least bit interested in life before, because I'm not one to put it all out there. You should have met the last me.
Oh, okay.
I just, I wasn't. And it wasn't from a matter of, I can admit my own weaknesses, but I think that this is something a lot of us share. Nobody else needs to hear my whining. Nobody else needs to be burdened with
See,
my crap.
that's where I completely disagree. Because if you don't vent that to somebody, then you're dealing with it on your own, and then it's just becoming a bigger and bigger and bigger part of your life.
Correct.
That's like, I always go back to addiction and mental health because the only, that and law enforcement, and I'm not very good at that. That's the only shit I know, right? Like, the less I talked about things, the worse I felt inside. The more stressed I got, the more anxious I got, the more depressed I got. The potential for me to fly off the handle was a lot quicker. You know, I think you need that vent. I think you need those friends that are like, yeah, well, Natalie's going to go off again, another 20-minute rant, but they listen. And you get that off your chest because they say something in recovery that a burden unshared is a burden doubled. So,
I like that.
you don't share it, it just becomes bigger. It becomes a bigger part of your psyche.
Well, and I think for me, I didn't realize it because I left the DA's office, but when I was at the DA's office, even this was before I had kids, but there was always, the constant commiseration. And there was that support group. You just didn't realize that you had it.
Mm-hmm.
And then when I, went into the civil world, and then I was having kids, and then all of this was kind of building and building and building and building, kind of just got, didn't notice it, didn't notice what I had been missing until I was back in the criminal system, but was closing myself off from my colleagues, on a very baseline personal level. Like there were those couple people that, yeah, I would talk about business struggles or what it's like starting your own practice and needing support from them on that aspect.
Yeah, the
But
acquaintances and the coworkers.
right. And those were fun, but it was always like, I'm not taking that further step. I can't, because nobody needs, until, once I started therapy. But one of the other things that I started doing was volunteering as a peer volunteer with Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, which is our, substance abuse and mental health essentially employee assistance program for lawyers in Pennsylvania.
Your internal support network.
Yeah. And when I realized, I was like, wait, I like when I get these calls. It feels good for me because part of what you have to do is somebody doesn't want to just yap at you. There's a back and forth. So you end up kind of, your valve is venting a little bit as you're sharing back and forth to help them get through something. And then it was like, oh, wait, that helped. But it took, a long time for me until pretty much the last LCL conference in April that I went to, where I was like, I can't keep being like this. I can't keep internalize, like, my friends care about me. There are people that care and want to know. And I would find it insulting if I knew that someone I cared about, a friend of mine, was not sharing their vulnerabilities with me. I would feel shafted. And I'm like, but wait, that's how you're living, you big giant hypocrite. Like, not cool.
I think that's what a lot of us do. I mean, a lot of us don't take advantage of the people around us. Like, another thing from recovery is, if someone wants to help you, why would you deprive them of the ability to help you? Right? Like, you don't think about that ever. Like, that's not a thought that comes into your head like, oh, they want to help me. Why would I stop them? They're trying to do something good for me because it's good for them as well.
Because I think we're stuck in our own heads.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where, and granted, we go a little bit back and forth here. We go all over the place. But, being a parent and raising two girls and working a full-time job as an attorney, having a husband that's a former police officer, like, your kids, it has got to be nothing less than a miracle to shade them from the truth on some of these things. Some of the stuff you see, and like dad's not coming home and going, yeah, I saw a guy shot in the head 27 times today. Like, he's not going to talk about that, right? You're not going to come home and talk about a homicide or a rape trial. Your kids get shielded from a lot. As a parent, that's what you do, right? I mean, that's what my parents try to do. That's what every parent tries to do. You try to protect your children. Do you think that as a member of the CJ system and as your husband as a former police officer, do you think that since he retired, you still have the same level of keeping information from the kids as they get older? Or do you think that, that has kind of changed as they've gotten older and as your husband got out of the system?
I think we kind of flip-flopped it because, you know, a handful of years after he got out of the system, I dove headfirst back in the system. So there's a little less shielding, but I think it's more based on them getting older, and truly, at least for my oldest right now, just because by virtue of her age, she's much more curious about things. And she's kind of all over the board because she's still figuring out, who or what or she is as a person.
So how do you handle that? I mean, shit, sorry to interrupt you, but I mean, like, how do you handle that a kid's becoming more aware of the world around them and now they want to know everything that's going on?
You try not to crawl under a rock. I mean, I had a case, that was at a prelim that my daughter just heard snippets about. It was something that I believed had the potential of being a media case, which I hate. I'm not that attorney seeking out the cameras. I'd rather hide from them, go in the back door. She, knew not at all who my client was, nor should she. But she wanted to come to the hearing. And I'm thinking, my mind automatically goes to worst possible scenario is, it was an alleged crime of violence. It could be a media case. It could be a circus. Somebody could go off. My kid's going to get hurt and blah. And I was like, no. She's like, but I want to see. You've let me come to other things and watch. I was like, there's too much potential that something could go wrong. And she just looked at me so innocently, which I say because she has my kids have the most innocent little faces. And was like, but anything could go wrong anywhere at any time. That doesn't mean it will. And I might be just fine and learn something. And
I mean, that brings up another really important thing. Like, now you got to, and I mean, this is just me flying off the top of my head. I mean, you're also trying to shade them from the potential ramifications. Like, if you're on the news and your kids are there, then they're publicly visible. Excuse me, people can recognize who they are, and then that's another element of like disaster that could happen.
And that's something that I, worry about when you get those things at the beginning of a school year from the school. Do we have permission to publish your child's picture? And you can check that box or not check with names. Not mine's like no names, no, because I'm terrified that what I do. It's hard enough hearing it from my own friends. How do you defend criminals and sleep at night? But like having their friends or them suffer the consequences, even just with me being seen, but especially with my oldest, we are rubber stamps of each other. So, even though what I did in that scenario was have her closed off somewhere with someone that was safe, had them bring her to the courtroom once we determined that it was all fine, set her somewhere where, and she knew, don't talk to me, don't look at me, don't mom, and she knows all this. But we share a face. So there's no way if you actually were looking that you would not have been like,
oh, that's Natalie's kid.
It has to be, and so you want to protect them, but I love seeing them grow. I love seeing them be more curious, but I'm so jaded just from what I see that it makes it hard. And it's like, I want to just put you in a bubble because A, mama bears do that generally. B, I see disgustingness all day. And you said, how do you turn that switch off when you come home? And that's the other part is it became the internalization of all of it, and the stress builds and builds and builds. So the trade-off and the bad choice that I realized was happening was, okay, I'm not talking about this stuff at home for good reason, but I'm not talking about this stuff with anybody. And so therefore I've just deprived my kids of having a fully present mom emotionally and mentally, because it's taking a toll and because it has pulled me away from them, because I'm either stuck in my own head and overthinking and replaying all of this because it needs to come out somewhere and I'm not paying attention, or they're, yes, they're kids, but kids are not stupid and they are wily and they know when something's on your mind.
So in comes therapy.
In comes therapy.
Okay, so besides therapy, because I'm not going to get into your therapy, but besides therapy, what else do you do to balance all the chaos that goes on in your daily life?
Well, just to touch on non-detailed therapy, but I did therapy wrong for about a year. I just went in there and was like BSing with my therapist. I don't think I cut.
Yeah, I'm good at that.
And yeah, I did it for a good long time. And finally, I was just like, oh, and now I'm trying to do it the right way to accomplish things. Other things to do, I started talking. I started talking to my friends, to the people close to me, that wanted to know and that genuinely cared, and stopped being a hypocrite, which is, if I tell people don't apologize, you're not being a burden to me by venting to me, I'm here to listen, then I have to give them the same respect.
I mean, I've been in therapy most of my adult life, in and out of therapy since I was probably, 12 years old. And I always did therapy the wrong way. Smart people go into therapy and immediately figure out how to win, how to beat the system. And I'm sure you're one of those people where within the first hour, if I do this guy's going to leave me alone. He's going to back off a little bit. If I do this, they're going to dig in deeper. So you learn how to manipulate the therapist. You learn how to manipulate the manipulator.
Yes.
And I
And
was
then
the
you
same
kind
way.
of get your rocks off and enjoy the fact that you could do it.
Yeah, I mean, so I did that a lot, in my adult life. And then I ran into a therapist before I got sober who is still my therapist today. And I used to roll in there with this cup full of vodka during my therapy session because I was already lit, and I would sit there and bullshit with him. So, when I went to therapy, he was like, good for you, stay in touch with me. And I was able to keep him as a therapist after I got out because a lot of times when you come out of rehab, they want to give you a different therapist. They want to give you
Really?
a therapist that specializes in substance abuse or specializes in PTSD.
But not keep you with the one you've been treating with?
They usually don't want to give you a general practitioner.
Oh, okay.
They want somebody who's
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
no, no, you're good. You're good. We do that here. They wanted someone who was specialized in my exact issues. And I was like, I'm not going to anybody but this guy because he called me on my shit. So fast forward, I come back to therapy after I get out and he's like, you look good, blah, 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 blah. Where's your mug? I'm like, what do you mean? He's like, where's your mug full of booze? I'm like, what do you mean, bro? He literally called me out on it so I'm like, this guy's fucking paying attention. Like, I like this guy. So he's still my therapist to this day. Now, I don't go twice a week like I used to. I still have, sometimes it's just a phone call for 15 minutes just to vent. But I don't know about you, but once the top was off the bottle, once I started talking, I didn't want to stop because now I was getting all this shit out. Like I always use that analogy of a dumpster, right? The dumpster was full. So in my mind, our mental health, our mental well-being is kind of like a dumpster. We start off the dumpster's empty. There's no bad shit in there, right? And over the course of our lifetime, we fill that dumpster with bad shit. We just keep piling shit in there, piling shit in there, piling shit in there. And at some point, it becomes full. And then it starts to spill over. Nervous breakdown, alcoholism, total mental break. That's what the ramifications were for me, was a total mental break. Once that shit hits the ground, you have to deal with it. There is no more putting shit aside. There is no more hiding shit. It's like, I have to deal with this or things are going to get a lot worse now, And it took me to that point where I wanted to put a bullet in my head to figure out that I needed to make a change. And, for me, that was when the dumpster was overfilling and I no longer had anywhere to put the bad shit.
I like that analogy. I would probably look at my result of my dumpster filling, that it then spontaneously combusted and became a dumpster fire. Because for me, knowing that I was starting to be overwhelmed and the anxiety was getting to be, verging on debilitating, and, all of a sudden thinking, I had, it took me coming to the realization that what I believed was imposter syndrome based on a professional issue, that it was actually personal, related personally, not that's where that was rooted. But the only thing that made sense to me was I knew that but by the grace of God, did not have the ability to go much further, because if I hit mental breakdown point, I risk my law license.
Yeah, see, I didn't care.
That was the all I cared
That's where
because
we're definitely different because I didn't care anymore. Like you still had that. I don't want to lose my license. I want to do this shit, and I was like, I'm probably gonna quit this job anyway, so I don't give a fuck anymore.
but to me it was like that was my line of demarcation. That was, I can't let it get to that point. And I'd pull back some and then creep up again, and pull back some and then creep up again, and until finally it was like, okay, something has to give. And what that is me. And so I love the fact that you said that your therapist would call you out on stuff. My
It's like
therapist
26 years old, and this guy's calling me out.
my therapist is a godsend. Former federal law enforcement, former military, became a therapist. Decided when I was, because I'm sure as you know, it is really hard to find a therapist. It is a grueling process. And then,
One that you actually can, see that's not going to fall for your bullshit.
well, I wasn't at the point of that's what I was looking for yet. I was just trying to get it covered by my insurance. So that's where I started. And as it turns out, you send the online request to, company A who has X number of therapists. And, somehow it was brought to what became my therapist's attention that, and he was like, "Oh, I'm taking the defense attorney. We're going to have some fun with this." And he let me go for a year of bad therapy. And he put me in the worst position possible, which is I then fairly recently had to say, I just kind of sat here, was full of it. He's like, "Oh, I know." I was like, "Why didn't you call me out?" He said, "Because it was a lot more fun to wait for you to call yourself out."
See, that's a good therapist, though. Like, a good therapist to me is someone who listens and goes where you take it. You know what I mean? Like, they don't push you. They don't make you talk about things. They just sit there and listen. And if they think you're full of shit, they sit there and make a little note, like, full of shit. This is a bunch of bullshit. And they
wait long
they
for
wait,
you to
they
trip
wait for
it.
you to figure it out on your own that you're bullshitting them. And then once you get that point where you're like, oh, I'm bullshitting this guy, and you get that moment where it's like, this is doing no good for me. Let's like actually try to get healthy.
Yeah, and I think what it was that first, and I won't forget it, that first session of legit therapy I let myself have. And I was in tears, and not emotional, sad tears, like the release of just everything. When I got home, I was exhausted. Like I felt like I had gotten hit by 15 dumpsters and their fires. And realized that, but it was also the most peaceful I had slept in a long time that night. The noise was quieter. There was less in the dumpster. But the other thing that, for me has been a huge thing is starting to do CrossFit. And I love it because it is a huge help for my mental health. Like picking up heavy things and moving them to different places is very therapeutic.
You know what when I left rehab, you know what some of the things they said for me to do were I was always big into the gym, right? Like anybody who worked with me knew I was big in the gym, but it was like eat well, get 8 hours of sleep, get a therapist, and get exercise. It is amazing what the dopamine release does when you work out, how it equals you out mentally.
Well, what's interesting for me is, yes, everybody always said, like, it's good for you.
Yeah, until you do it, you don't
physically,
realize it.
well, until,
And then you miss it.
Also, for me, though, I worked out for years. I worked at a gym, as you know, when I was at the DA's office. Is finding the right exercise for you and your mind. So for me, endless walking on a treadmill or on a stair climber made my anxiety 150,000 times worse. I hate cardio. First of all, I hate it. I'm a smoker. I'm never going to like it. But it did nothing positive. It literally made me nutty. So to then be in an atmosphere where we're doing wacky, crazy stuff, but like I'm sitting here squatting more weight than I ever thought I could. And it's exercising and releasing my mind as much, if not more, than my body.
See, I've never been a fan of CrossFit. It's just not my bag, right? For me, it's 45 minutes in a gym, do 25 different reps or different sets, do multiple exercises, do as much as I can as in short a period as I can. I don't take a break. I don't like rest. It's just I keep going for 45 minutes because it's my cardio. Like I hate, I'm like you. I don't run. I mean, I ran as a cop when I chase people. Other than that, I don't run at all. If someone chases me, I'm probably going to stop and give them my wallet and say thank you. But, it's, you're right, 100%. I agree with you. Like, you have to find the form of exercise that fits your personality. And you are a go, 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 go girl. So I can see why CrossFit would be right up your alley because it's just nonstop, brutal workouts.
Well, and what's interesting, at least the place I go, like a lot of the traditional CrossFit, separate from like the powerlifting part, I can't. I have a plate in my ankle, so some of it I'm never going to be able to do. But for me, deciding to start this venture at 48, almost 49 years old, was also somewhat you know, I want to go back to a place where I am physically strong. Okay, in realizing there's nothing wrong. I don't care if you weigh 5,000 pounds. It wasn't about that. It was about, my body gave me the two greatest gifts I will ever have in my life. And it's about high time I said thank you.
Yeah, I like jiu-jitsu, martial arts. I took judo for a long time. I just got back into jiu-jitsu, but I'm nursing a shoulder injury, so I'm kind of out of it right now. But for me, it's like that combat sport. Like I need that healthy competition. I may get my ass kicked 10 times out of 10, but I'm getting better every day and I'm challenging myself and I'm putting myself in a very uncomfortable position very many times with the guy in a sweaty gi with his balls in my face trying to choke me out. It's not exactly fun, but that works for me.
But
That works for me because it's that competition. It's that mano y mano. Like, let's go at it. Let's beat each other up and then let's shake hands afterwards. Like, I think that's amazing. And it's the gym. It's just lifting weights. I like to lift weights. Now, granted, I'm 50, so I can't lift heavy anymore because I guess when you turn 50, everything breaks.
Don't say that.
Yeah. But so for you, it's been a combination of therapy, CrossFit. Do you do anything else to keep your mind in the right place?
I talk. I do this. I come sit here
Isn't
with
this
you.
great though? Isn't this great though? This is better than any therapy I can go to. For me, this is better than any therapy.
This has been a peg in that board that I didn't know I needed and kind of tripped into coming here. But I think the ability to, well, literally probably tripped on my way in, but I'm clumsy like that. But the ability to have conversations outside of just my little bubble. But the other thing is to concentrate, and this is so cheesy sounding, but I love to read. That's something I do, but I do more audiobooks now because,
You're on the go all the time.
well, right, and because it's hard for me to sit still. I know that's shocking, but the other thing is just being the reward of being more present with my family mentally, and not and being able to separate that time for them is a huge thing. But also just you know treating self-care is such a trendy, ridiculous statement.
But it's what it is.
It is, but I think when you say that to people, at least from a female perspective, I see someone posting that, on Facebook or whatever. I'm thinking, dear Lord, who has time for bubble baths and nature walks until you realize that it doesn't necessarily what it means.
If they're born after 2000, self-care is, a facial and, putting a filter on and taking multiple pictures and posting them all over the internet. It's not, we come from a different generation. And, we come from the generation where like self-care is like showering, put deodorant on, go to the gym, exercise, eat. Like it's old school values. It's do the right things and good things will come your way.
Yeah.
The generations have kind of changed in what self-care involves. Now it's all about looking pretty and being in the best shape possible and then posting 7,000 selfies on fucking Instagram. It's you and I think, are very similar in that, like, we're not posting this shit on Instagram. We're doing it because it makes us feel good and because it's for us. It's not for everybody else out there to see.
Well,
Tell me if I'm wrong.
No, I agree with you. I think I think there's too many keyboard warriors. But, to kind of finish the rest of my answer to you is above and beyond my family, working out, reading, talking to friends, faith is a big part of my life. So that's something that I lean on heavily. But I'm also, one of my cornerstones is God helps those who help themselves. You can't just sit there and do nothing and expect things to change. But my faith and going to church and praying, for me, has been a huge help in also getting past the point of thinking I'm able to pull one over on God and that, I'm just going to, like, talking to my therapist. He doesn't really know what's going on. And then realizing, okay, that's about the dumbest thought you ever had in life. So I think finally getting the combination and the balance right of things, I think puts us all in a better headspace.
So do you feel that since you've gotten involved in therapy and CrossFit and, maintaining your faith and your relationship with God, do you feel that you are a better parent now than you were 10 years ago?
Yes.
Tell me why. Because from what it sounds like, you were a good parent before.
I
You
think, thank you for that. I think I'm a better parent in the sense that I've returned to the person that, and it's been a struggle for, a number of months, but because I'm more real of a parent. My kids are now seeing more person Natalie than mom. And I think that that's something that I deprive them of in a way. And part of it's because I know with my personality and my big loud mouth how hard it was, going through school and social struggles and going through college and law school, et cetera, et cetera. So not necessarily having those be traits that I wanted to pass on until it was undeniable that those traits had been passed on no matter what mold I was now trying to fit myself into is I'm not being as loud and mouthy and bold as I was for so long. But they didn't have to see that to get that. So now I have to be more real with me and more real with them so that they can learn how to manage it so they don't get punched in the face.
Yeah. See, I think like the perfect combination of a parent is part friend and the other part parent. Like having that relationship where you can have a conversation where the kids trust you enough to sit there and go, Mom, I got to talk about something. Can I get your advice on this? Or going out to the mall and going girl shopping, which, whatever. Doing things together that aren't where you're telling them what to do. I think that's a big key of parenting. And once again, I'm not a parent, so tell me if I'm wrong. But I think it's very important to be the parental figure, be the authority figure, but also be the friend.
I 150% agree with you, Mark, but the but is because I didn't go into parenting that way. I expected to be the disciplinarian, the because I said so, to be the way I was raised. And when I found myself with my kids, half asleep on the way to daycare at 6 o'clock in the morning, realizing they were some of my favorite people to talk to and seeing that start to present itself of this is what I want to be, didn't have those words for it, but it is great. It's sometimes it makes things blurry from the parental standpoint because kids blur lines. And so when my kids know I'm not their friend, but sometimes then it makes, well, I want to debate with you the fact that you wanted me to do X, Y, and Z. But I got to be honest, if I had to lose one of those two, especially with my kids being older, I would lose the parent, the authoritarian parent part, and hold on to the friend part. Because they're not going to be 30 and giving a hootenanny what I'm telling them to do. And that's rude. And it's disrespectful to them as people. So that role is going to go away.
Well, I mean, parenting is just like every other relationship. It's growing, it's changing, it's evolving, right? Like,
It
you're
is.
always the parent. You're always the parent. You're always the go-to person. You're always the protector. You're always the authoritarian. You're always that person to them. But as relationships go, as kids grow older and become adults, then now they're an adult. So do you treat them like when they're 12? And I think a lot of people have a problem with that as time goes on. the empty nesters and the issues with adjusting to the fact that their kids are no longer in the house. Your kids are coming up on that age where soon they're going to be going off on their own and they're going to be doing their own things. Besides it scaring the shit out of you, doesn't it make you kind of fucking proud that, with you being in the CJ system, your husband being in the CJ system, and all the shit that goes on in your daily lives outside of the home, that you guys were able to come home and raise these good kids that are going to make good decisions and,
It's absolutely amazing. It is the greatest feeling in the world. And
your number one accomplishment.
oh, without a doubt. And the one I was least prepared for and least educated for. But you hope that they make the right decisions. Yes, you hope that you've raised them right. You give them wings, you have to let them fly. But my perspective is if you've been too much of the drill sergeant and not enough of the friend, they're going somewhere else when they do something wrong. And that would be my biggest regret. I want to get that phone call, and I've said it to them. I will always love you. And I mean that, and I will show it to you. But if you screw up, because look at what it landed me in when I didn't want somebody telling my parents. I got the crap beat out of me for a year. I don't want that to happen to my kids. And if I have to sacrifice telling them to wash the dishes so that if they call me when they're scared at a party, I'll take it.
Are your parents still married?
My dad's dead.
Okay.
But yes.
Sorry to bring that up.
No, it's fine.
So I went through a couple divorces before I was even 18. Like my mom divorced my dad when I was like 4, and then she divorced my stepdad. My stepdad is who raised me, right? Okay. So none of this is your fault, FYI. This, not your fault. But, when I became a cop, he was like, oh, well, I knew you'd be on one side of the law. And I'm like, really? Like, he literally thought I was going to get arrested. And, to this day, I don't talk to my mother. My real dad is dead. I didn't talk to him for 15 years. I still talk to my stepdad.
And he did something
all my
very
parents,
right.
all my parents, the only one I talk to throughout the last 30 years has been my stepdad. And it's not because he's my dad, it's because he's my friend. Mm. He raised me. He was a very good disciplinarian. He used to beat the crap out of me when you could. He was an all-state wrestler, so he would just, not hit me, but he would put me in moves that I couldn't get out of when I was acting crazy. He would discipline me. He would, if he had to get physical, he got physical. I mean, I believe in parents getting physical when they need to. But the fact that he was always there for me in a non-judgmental aspect, where if I had a problem, I went to him and I explained the problem, and he would say, "You're a dumbass, but how can I help?" And that's why I brought up the thing about friend and parent. My mother was more of a disciplinarian, and she's, batshit crazy, so I don't talk to her. But my stepdad, he just was always level. He was always that very calm parent where I had to push him really, really far to get him to get physical. And of course, I did.
Shocking.
But yeah, I still talk to him. And granted, I don't talk to him as much as I want to, or I should, because I'm a bad son. But he has always been there in that non-parental aspect as well as the parental aspect. So I could always feel like I could go to him. I think that's amazing. I think that's a very telling about who he is as a person, to be able to deal with all my crazy shit. Like when I got sober, when I started doing this podcast, I sent him like the first episode, and he watched it. He's like, "You finally found out who you are." I'm like, "What?" He's like, "You finally found something that you should be doing. Go with it." And
That's
I was
awesome.
like, wow. Like those moments, I've only had a couple of them in my lifetime. The first one when I became a cop, he was very proud of me. And then when I quit the department, he was very proud of me. Because he's like, "You figured out that that's not for you anymore. Good job." And then when I got sober, and then when I started the podcast, like those moments, those 4 moments in my life have probably meant more to me than any experience I've ever had with my mother. Unfortunately. Granted, she brought me into the world, but she didn't do it alone, But yeah, I just, sorry, I kind of vented there.
Well, no, actually, don't apologize, and thank you for sharing that, because I often, as any parent does, I often question, am I being too friend and not enough parent? So hearing that really resonates and means a lot to someone like me, and saying, I want my daughters, should they choose to have kids, and this is a big thing because it was hard for me when I had kids because it was, to be able to pick up the phone, no matter what time it is, and be comfortable enough to say, Mom, I don't know what I'm doing. Can you come be here? And not me go over, tell them everything they're doing wrong. Just literally sit there in the rain with them.
Yeah, I remember when I went to rehab, I was, a hot mess. And I called him and told him I was going to rehab. He's like, good, good, good. Excuse me. He's always known I was a drinker. Like, he didn't let me drink. I think I had one beer with him in my entire life. Like, just that's the relationship. It's like you don't drink with your dad. That's just not going to happen. But yeah, it's kind of crazy when I look back on it because, you would think the most impactful moments you have from a parent would be the biological parent. And granted, I do have a lot of impactful moments, but they were just not good ones. And to look at somebody who didn't have to take on two of kids that weren't his own, he didn't have to raise them. He didn't have to stay in touch with them after their mother divorced him and treated him like crap. Like, he didn't need to stay attached to us. To this day, my sister, I think, still calls him like every week. Like he's just there. And it's, when I look back on my life, I have a lot of shame in things that I did. I have a lot of shame in that I let him down because he didn't raise me to be the person that I was. He raised me to be the person I am today. Why did it take me 50 years to realize that he was right the whole time, that I am a good person and I can do good things? Why did it take so long for me to get out of my own way? Right?
Well, and because nothing's going to have as much staying power unless we figure it out on our own. And to latch on to something that you said, not always the biological parent. I'm adopted. My parents are my parents. They raised me. I don't have any idea who my biological parents are. My
Their loss.
brother, but two people that I don't know if somebody would have given them a crystal ball with, everything that turned out to be me, would have still done it, but that didn't have to took me on. And I chuckle about the fact that my brother is their biological child.
Mm-hmm.
We resemble each other. I look exactly like pretty much what they would have had they had a daughter. And I think about these things, and when you look at family dynamics, blood doesn't mean anything. I think we can all agree to that. Yeah. My parents are my parents, and I hate the phrase. It's one of my things. Well, did you ever want to meet your real parents? No, I lived with them.
Yeah, your real parents raised you.
I lived with them.
Yeah.
They're my parents. Those are my real parents. And I'm grateful to my biological parents. I didn't end up in a garbage bag, in a dumpster to fill that dumpster up too. I'm here. I had a great life. No life is perfect, but I'm here. And I think about the fact of my children are not biologically related to their grandparents on my side. But there are people that they are biologically related to that aren't a part of their life. And I look at it when my dad died unexpectedly. And it was a little over 5 years ago. My one daughter, my oldest daughter, was very close. They both were close. I mean, I was a daddy's girl, but they were Pappy's angels. No matter what I told him about them, it didn't matter. My daughter went at the viewing, kind of stood up, leaned in, and hugged my dad. But he's not blood related. So, I'm sure we'll get on that soapbox together at some point, which is...
It just shows the impact that kindness and unconditional love has. Like at the end of the day,
love, quite a concept.
At the end of the day, that's what it is. In my mind, the reason why I got clean, the reason why I addressed my mental health, the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing now is because of everything my stepfather taught me from the age of 5 on. Everything he tried to impart in me that maybe I didn't realize I had learned it, I learned it.
Yeah.
He was a good man. He is a good man. He's a great man. Selfless, loving, always there. And, getting sober, I can finally do that myself. So, thanks.
Yeah. Shout out to your stepdad.
Thanks, Dad.
He did a great job.
Yeah, sorry it took so long. You always said I was a little slow. But yeah, so bringing this thing whole round to the start and finish, whatever you want to call it. Being in the CJ system, if you were able to say some things that maybe could help people with becoming a parent in this system that you're involved in, what would be some little nuggets that you could put out there to maybe help people navigate the waters that you've gone through?
We can't shield them from everything. They deserve better than to be shielded from everything. Better to hear it and see it from us as their parents than to hear it and see it in some back-asswards way later. Don't let your concern, worry, what you see on a daily basis allow you to disconnect from your own emotions and not form those emotional bonds. Don't be so worried about protecting your kids from everything that you set them in a box and sit them on a shelf, because that's not fair to them. And that's been the biggest struggle for me. Not the helicopter parent, but let them make mistakes. Let them screw up. And let them fall, let them scrape their knees, and probably the biggest thing is there's a bunch of us that are parents in this system, grandparents, cousins, friends. Again, reach out. Admit that you don't know what you're doing. And know that there are people here, and that was a hard thing for me. I had no idea what I was doing as a parent. I didn't know where to reach. I would have gladly told somebody if I thought somebody would listen. So I'm saying, I'm listening. There is no judgment. Feel free. Let me know you have no idea what you're doing and you want somebody to sit there in the rain with you.
Well, I love this conversation. I thought it was pretty awesome. Thank you for being so honest about, being a parent and all the craziness you deal with 2 daughters. I just have 2 female dogs and a girlfriend. It drives me nuts. But anyway, once again, we're glad you guys joined us. This is the Steel City Roundtable. This is what we do. Reach out to us on social media, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, X, something like that. And then let your friends know if you think they want to listen to this stuff and hear what we have to say. We are currently on YouTube, Spotify, Rumble, and Apple Podcasts, and a bunch of just the audio only. The website's almost done, so we'll get that out here soon. But please leave your comments. I love to get into these debates with you folks, and I love to hear what you have to say. So just remember, we love you.
Can I throw in one quick?
Oh yeah, hell yeah.
Comment away, but do it as if it's going to be read in court someday.
Yeah, I mean, I will never put your name on here, but I will. If you say something dumb, I'm going to call you on it. And if you say something smart, I'm going to call you on it. Because I feel that we should represent everybody equally. So, the good and the bad.
Fair.
And, that's who we are. So just remember, we love you guys. There's always a seat here for you at the Steel City Roundtable, and we can't wait to talk to you guys again.
Have a good week.
Take care. Happy Thanksgiving.